Okay, greetings, Free the Animal fans. I'm here today with Jay Stanton of Knolls.org. He's the author of The Knoll Credo, and he also blogs at the website Knolls.org, Gnolls.org. Welcome, Jay.
I'm glad to be here. It's beautiful.
Yes, here in Arnold. So, you're an author of this book. It's been out for a couple of years now. Tell us about it.
Mm-hmm. Well, from one point of view, it's a ethnobiography, such as someone like Jared Diamond or Margaret Mead might write about a race of carnivorous predators, i.e. gnolls, which are hyena people, but that you can actually talk to. And from another point of view, it's what happens if you smash together Avatar, Fight Club, and V for Vendetta at very high speed.
Okay, so it's as I understand it, there is actually a fantasy character or a fantasy species called gnolls. That you decided to take this fantasy species and write something like what reads to me as like a non-fiction book with footnotes and all.
Absolutely. At least it starts with them. One of the introductory chapters of the book is a scholarly paper about gnolls, and that's why I say I did my best to write it as if it were a non-fiction book about someone going to study gnolls and then getting sucked into their world and into their conflicts with humans and what happens as a result of that.
Okay.
So there are multiple fantastic creatures in there. Gnolls are the only ones you meet directly. There are others that are in the world, but you don't see them as part of this particular story. But the thing that distinguishes this world from many others is that there's no magic in the world. Everything has to survive on its own. That's what I explore here. The conflicts between gnolls and humans, and how that works out.
Okay, so they're fantasy creatures. However, there's no magic.
Right.
In other words, so they are carnivorous hunters essentially that live in packs and have a hierarchical structure. So, what is the relevance to paleo primal living to this?
Well, if we basically to make sure it's clear, yes, gnolls are hyena people, specifically spotted hyena people. There are several kinds of hyenas, which means they're pack hunters who sometimes hunt alone and sometimes will hunt in large groups depending on the prey. And essentially, it explores several topics that are of relevance to the paleo world. One is if you want to get a better perspective on humans and what humans do, you need to ask somebody who isn't human.
Right. Okay.
So that's one of the main themes. It's what do gnolls think about people?
Right.
What do people look like from their perspective?
Mm-hmm.
And another source of tension is that the societies and the clans in which spotted hyenas live, and which I based gnoll society very closely on, are very similar to the way we lived for millions of years as hunter-gatherers. The packs are of similar size, 15 to 100 people, or spotted hyenas or gnolls. They're very strongly socially intelligent and relate to each other in very similar ways. But in other ways, they are clearly different. So it's exploring that tension. You've got these creatures that at first seem savage and wild and everything else, but after a while you start realizing they're much more like humans than we might want to admit at first. And so there's a great deal of tension there, and trying to resolve that and figure out what about this is what about a gnoll is more like what humans are, and what about them is purely gnollish. And I leave that question open to the reader. That's something that you have to decide for yourself as the book progresses.
Okay, the Knoll Credo. Check it out. It's on his website, knolls.org. Now let's move on to your blog.
Sure.
It's what's your purpose in blogging?
Well, my purpose in blogging, it started out purely as, well, I'm an author, I should have a website. And from there, if you look at my very early articles, they encompass a wide range, basically anything I felt like writing about at the time. Then gradually I started, writing about, paleo topics. Mainly it's about, evolutionary discordance and what's the, where are we now as humans and how we live in houses and cities and, driving cars around and all these other things versus what were we selected for? What evolutionary pressures turned humans into what they are now? And the two are almost completely different in every respect. An animal in the zoo is at least zoos try to sort of simulate the natural environment of, say, a polar bear or a penguin or something. They put a refrigerator in there, but there's no effort to even simulate that as far as where humans live versus where humans evolved. And that discordance has any number of consequences. Obviously, diet being the first and most obvious consequence of that with the transition to agriculture. But there are plenty more, which I also take time to explore. But right now, I spend a lot of time on the discordance of diet and the science behind, paleo, as it were.
Right. So, and why so sciencey? I've read a lot of your articles. I'm sure that a lot of people have, and you go into sometimes very great detail with charts and studies and figures and so on. So why that approach rather than a different approach like some other people do?
Well, by writing that sort of detailed, in-depth article, basically there's the old saying, he who teaches learns twice. By writing those articles, I increase my own understanding. In fact, that's how I find out if I understand a topic. If I can write a well-referenced, clearly explained article about a topic, odds are pretty good I understand it myself. And if I can't, if I start writing it and I start getting bogged down, then I realize, well, maybe I don't understand this myself, and I need to do some more research. So really, it springs from an effort of myself to understand all these issues, and right now, again, concentrating on diet at the moment, and if possible, present that knowledge to other people in such a way that they can understand it too. And it seems to work pretty well. I get a lot of good feedback. I get a lot of really good comments, and good, my commenters seem to think I'm doing a good job, and I've got a pretty good reputation in the community for that.
How would you characterize your commenters? Are they science geeks, nerds, gym rats, or people that are trying to advance their own knowledge step by step along with you?
Yes, and all of the above. Because of the type of articles I write, yes, I get people who are really looking to increase their own knowledge in whatever way it is. So I get a incredibly wide variety of people, both as readers of the blog, fans of the book, and both.
Right.
And they really, it's hard to say what everybody has in common except a great curiosity about the subject.
You've how would you characterize that your blog has grown from when you first started really writing about paleo and science? How have things gone for you in terms of readership?
Oh, it's been amazing. I mean, you can look back at my early articles, and they have comments on them now, but they didn't when I wrote them. People went back and read them.
Yes.
And
that's always
commented.
good. When you get comments from way back when.
An article I wrote a year and a half ago, and people still feel it's relevant to them and still comment on it. But my readership has grown by orders of over an order of magnitude since I started writing. And it's to the point that it's gotten me a fairly solid place in the online paleo community. And in fact, apparently, my science is strong enough that the folks that run the Ancestral Health Symposium said, you do a great job on that. Why don't you present at the next AHS, as you are also.
Jay, now you're aware of it. Probably this all boiled up, I suppose, at the Ancestral Health at UCLA, which you attended, and started with this whole kind of controversy between food reward or low carbohydrate diets, and all the periphery about that. So food reward or LC?
My answer to that is generally yes, because when you look at what's actually happening with human metabolism, it's a gigantically complex system. It's a whole bunch of self-modifying feedback systems. Homeostasis is the technical term, and if you modify any step in that in that cycle, it will usually have a ripple effect on the rest of the steps. But since it's a feedback system and it's going in a loop, X causes Y, Y causes Z, Z causes X. It's sort of silly to say that one part of it causes all the other parts. No, every part of it causes all the other parts. So
it's a complex system.
So does carbohydrate restriction affect that system? Yes, it does, and people tend to lose a reasonable to substantial amount of weight on low carb.
Why?
That's longer than we've got in this interview, and I don't claim to understand every single aspect of it. I don't think anyone does, but it is effective, but it's not the only thing that's effective. And most importantly, since it's only one part of the system, a lot of people find that going low carb will only get them so far. It will, they'll lose 50 or 60 pounds or whatever it is, and then they'll stall out. Well, the answer is because there's a lot of other issues involved in this whole system, and that's as far as you can get by modifying just that one part of it. Which is not to say it's ineffective, because it's absolutely effective. It's just only one part of the system, and at that point, maybe that's not the highest nail on the board. You got to pound something else down that's sticking up more.
Right. So, and then on food reward palatability, give us a brief idea of what that means.
I don't even really like using the term food reward, because it sort of implies that the reward is solely a property of the food, which it isn't.
Like a ribeye steak.
Yeah, exactly. The reward is a property we assign to food, which depends greatly on our own nutritional state, our own cultural context, and many other things. So, for instance, the classic question, I like ribeye a lot more than I like Pringles, but I can't stop eating the Pringles. Why is that? And the answer is because your motivation to eat more of a food is not one thing. It's the product of several different motivations, like how much you like it on the one hand, and how much it satiates you or causes satiety for you on the other hand. And then you've got your cultural preferences coming in here, and you've got your sheer willpower coming in here, which can kind of override the whole deal to some extent or another. So I think the mistake we run into is that once you can simplify things too much to a degree that they're not true anymore. And I think that's the problem we run into when we talk about food reward. You think of it being purely a property of food, and it's not. It's more complicated than that. Now, it's not unfeasibly complicated. It's not incomprehensible, and that's what my AHS talk is going to be about, is explaining that to everybody. Because, there's plenty of science around the issue, and it's not actually very difficult science. It just needs to be explained in a good way, which is what I've tried to do in my blog post and what I'll be doing in my speech.
So now so there's this idea that you can like we had ribeyes last night, one of them courtesy of you, a big huge one, and you get to a point where I can't eat another bite of ribeye.
There it is. There it is. You can't eat it.
I can't eat another bite. Yet there's this idea of there's always room for dessert. What is happening there?
What's happening there? Well, when you look at whether you're going to either start eating or keep eating the food, again, you've got these motivations that push different directions. You've got the fact that you like a food pushing you to eat it, and then from the other direction, you've got satiation, which is your sensory response to the food, and satiety, which is your body's nutritional state, which can push you not to eat it. So when you've got the ribeye, your body's saying, you're hungry. Your body's saying, hey, I really could use some protein right now, and I could really use some, nice vitamin A and some other all the other wonderful fat-soluble nutrients. So you start eating the ribeye, and it's delicious.
Right.
And you say, oh, this is great. Then as you keep eating it, your desire to eat more kind of goes down because you're becoming satiated. And at some point, the curves cross, and you say, no, I don't want any more.
Right.
Now, you'll notice that you can still force yourself to eat more, but you don't want any more. But the thing with dessert is, when you look at the definition of dessert is, for the most part, empty calories. Same with the definition of snack food. And what we mean by empty calories is they provide energy in the form of calories, but they don't really provide any useful nutrition. They're just energy.
Its purpose is just to titillate the senses.
Exactly. So, given that, your body's got pretty much infinite ability to store extra energy in the form of fat. It ends up here.
Yes.
But what happens then is, when you're eating some of these empty foods, on some level your body understands, based on the taste of it and based on what gets absorbed, that there's nothing it needs in there nutritionally. So if what you really want is, or what your body really needs is either some more protein or some more micronutrients or some more vitamins or whatever, you're not getting that out of the dessert. You're not getting that out of the toaster pastries. You're not getting that out of these snack foods. So you can eat them and your body will say, no, I'm still hungry. There's still things I need nutritionally. And the fact that you're not giving them to them means you're still going to be, to some extent, hungry. Now, eventually you do stop eating, but that's mainly because of, at some point you get so full you get sick. And that's sort of the ejection scene. Your body's saying, look, give me any more of that and you will physically injure me. Stop that.
now I get the sense throughout this whole discussion, which started with LLC and food reward and all these other issues, I get the sense that the science isn't completely settled on this, and there is a faction of people out there who make it their business to do pretty much nothing but say you're screwed up, you're screwed up, you're screwed up, you're screwed up. Now, is it necessary that all this science be settled before anybody can really take any action for themselves, or indeed recommend action for others, or suggest action for others, write a book, write a blog, do a podcast? Or should everything be 100% settled first?
Well, I mean, absolutely not. I mean, you got to eat something while you're waiting for the double-blind, randomized control trials to finish.
Right.
I mean, at the end of the day, if you don't eat anything, you starve.
Right.
And you make the best decision you can based on the information you have at the time. So where paleo is, it seems to me, is we're trying to make two things meet in the middle. At least that's what I do. You've got the biochemistry and the modern science at one end, which tells us a great deal. And then from the other end, you've got what we know about the evolutionary context of humans and what we know about the millions of years, preceding today, and what shaped us into the animals we are right now. And you're kind of trying to get those both to meet in the middle, because archaeology can tell you some things and science can tell you some things. And they don't always, each of them has huge giant holes in the knowledge. But between them, we try to put them together, at least I do, and a lot of people do, and try to create a coherent picture out of that. And yes, you do your best, and if you don't know, you say, well, what's the most plausible thing to do? And meanwhile, you got to live your life, you got to eat something, so you do your best.
Any room for hyperbole, any room for sensationalism? I mean, just from the standpoint of maybe motivating people to give something a try that makes some sense on an evolutionary timescale, an anthropological timescale, a hunter-gatherer timescale.
Absolutely, I do it myself. Eat like a predator, right? My most famous, article.
Die biting the throat.
Exactly. And I wrote it that way to be motivational, to make people think about that, to make people realize that, you don't want to be on a diet, because that's like, I'm always who I am, I still like Twinkies and Pringles, but I'm forcing myself not to eat them. Whereas what you want is you want to think of yourself in a different way. You don't want to think of yourself as, I still like junk food, I'm just forcing myself not to do it. You want to say, no, what I am now is different. I'm a predator, I don't eat that stuff. You know, I eat these other wonderful, delicious things, and I feel much better after I eat them, and that's who I am now, and that's the change.
Sugar is poison.
Well, obviously not. I mean, I can eat some packs of sugar right now and not die.
Right, but on a hyperbolic level, valid to say that, or is it something that perhaps Robert Lustig shouldn't say, but a non-scientist, you know, a non-scientist like myself, you know, a shock jock blogger could say.
Well, I mean, people can say what they want. I'm not in the business of telling anybody
Right.
not to say, you know, not to say what they think it is, what they think the situation is. Is it hyperbole? Yes. You know, is fructose metabolized like a lot of other toxic substances? Yes. Well, the classic example is vegetables. You know, most of what's in vegetables, polyphenols, all that sort of thing, they're healthy because they're poisons, because you eat a tiny little bit of them and your body mounts a defense, and it turns out that the defense is more beneficial than the poison was poisonous.
Yeah.
And as Paul Jaminet likes to say in Perfect Health Diet, you've got the dose response curve. Most things are, if you don't get enough, it's bad. There's the good amount to get, which is good, and then there's too much, which is also bad.
Right.
So most things have that sort of dose response curve with them. As far as fructose, I'm not sure our body has particularly any metabolic need for it, but there's clearly a level at which our body is perfectly happy dealing with some intake of fructose.
Right.
The question is, however, there are also some studies that clearly establish if you eat 150 grams a day, it's really bad.
Right. Yeah.
So the question is, how much of it can you eat? What else does it have to be eaten, and what else should it be eaten with in order to make sure that it is not harmful?
And doesn't it turn out that in nature, unless you don't mind getting stung by bees, that pretty much the only way to get it in nature is to eat real fruit, and that has a limiting factor just in the terms of the fiber and bulk for most fruits.
Yeah, fruit and honey. Yeah, because and while it is true that some wild fruits are pretty sweet, on the whole, you can say that the stuff in a supermarket has been bred to be, on average, much sweeter than the wild varieties from which they came.
Right.
And also, as you point out, honey tends to be pretty stingy.
Yeah. Right. Okay. So let's talk a few minutes about Ancestral Health Symposium. You were at the one at UCLA last August. Impressions?
I had a great time, obviously, and it was wonderful to meet you and all the other folks who I either corresponded with or knew of. And yeah, there's nothing like your first time. It's like everybody's meeting each other for the first time. There was really great electricity and great energy about it.
Wasn't there? Yeah, it was. Okay, so now this year's Ancestral Health Symposium is going to be held at the Food Law Society,
Harvard
Food Law Society at Harvard in Boston, Cambridge, Massachusetts. And Jay and I will both be at that, and this I presented at the last one, and Jay is also going to be presenting at this one amongst a whole bunch of other speakers. And I understand that this thing has been sold out of tickets for quite some time now.
Oh yeah. Yeah, AHS 11 sold out pretty quickly, and so did AHS 12.
Right.
I mean, it wasn't in one day, but I think it was in like a month.
Right.
Yeah.
So you're going to be speaking at 12.
Yes.
Coming up here in just about 2 months' time.
Yep.
And so let's go into a little bit of what you're going to be speaking about without
recapping,
telling anyone not to come.
Exactly, without recapping the entire
Right.
speech. Well, the title of the speech is, what is hunger and why are we hungry?
Mm-hmm.
And, I've written a lot of articles on that subject. I've got a 7-8 part ongoing series about that. And the reason I find it fascinating is because fundamentally, when we're talking about obesity and the metabolic syndrome and people overeating, people didn't just wake up in 1980 and decide to get fat.
Right.
And there wasn't. I don't think you can pin a complete moral failure of everybody in America on the Reagan inauguration either. That doesn't make a lot of sense.
And he was a pretty thin guy too.
Yeah, exactly. So why do people eat? And the answer is people eat because they're hungry.
Mm-hmm.
So I think when we're trying to answer those questions about why did America and the rest of the world in a lot of ways start becoming, more obese, start suffering from, more of these, health issues related to, obesity and metabolic syndrome. If we want to know why that's happening, we need to know why are people consuming more food? And it's not because they decide to get fat. Obviously, they're hungry. People eat because they're hungry. And we should, in order to understand that, we need to understand what hunger is. And it turns out there's a lot of very well established and very solid science on what hunger is, which for whatever reason isn't amazingly well known either in the paleo community or in general. And I think that I can explain that in a way that will make it very clear to a lot of people, that will help people not only make better decisions of their own around what they choose to eat, but that can help us decide as we're going forward, what do we do about this? What are the highest nails that we can pound down? Where can we address it? And I'm not sure that necessarily taxing soda is the first is the first step you take. I mean, soda existed in the 50s and 60s and 70s, but yet people weren't getting gigantically fat. Junk food existed in the 50s and 60s and 70s, and people were getting gigantically fat. But for some reason, that's a huge problem. That's a huge problem now. Maybe, maybe not. Let's look at what fundamentally causes people to eat, and then I think we can do a better job answering those questions.
Great. All right. Well, I want to thank Jay again for coming over the hill from South Lake Tahoe to visit with us, for bringing a great steak, and for sitting down to talk with us. Be sure to check out his book, The Knoll Credo, and knolls.org as well. And then make sure that if you are going to Boston, make sure to see his presentation. And if you're not going to Boston, make sure to catch it when it comes out on Vimeo, probably within a couple months' time. All right, Jay, thanks a lot.
Thank you for having me here. And number one, I gotta thank Richard for bringing me down, and note that Richard is also presenting at AHS 2012, so I'm going to say, I'll definitely go check him out too. I'm sure he'll be have plenty of interesting stuff to say.
I'm going to talk about science, society, and maybe some mental issues as well. So, all right,
awesome.
Thanks
so
man.
much.
All right.